Hi, I'm John Craven at BevNet, and today I'm here with Jeff Kleiman, our editor-in-chief, and we're at our office in Watertown, Massachusetts, and we wanted to give a little check-in on kind of what's been going on in 2014 and talk about maybe what's in store for the rest of the year. So let's start out just by talking about some of the categories that have been newsworthy and impressive so far.
So one of the things we continue to see are a lot of companies jumping into that HPP Juice space, which is something interesting because there have been three front runners and some strong regional players, and right now it feels like you can't start a juice company without first sourcing yourself some high pressure processing equipment, either line time or trying to buy your own. It hasn't gotten to that capacity expansion frenzy that we're seeing in craft beer, but there are a lot of people trying to get their hands on this technology.
Yeah, I think it still seems like it's a little bit of a barrier to entry for some of these brands, but it definitely isn't like a point of differentiation on a product anymore, which is kind of shocking given that HPP is anything but a household name as far as the consumers go. But I think it's almost like if you see a bottle of juice, it's like, this is HPP, right? And that's sort of leading to some companies trying to differentiate with, we've seen two brands come out with kids lines, and I think that's sort of what has to happen next is, people have to figure out how to differentiate. We don't need another, green juice and sort of all the standard stuff that's already out there.
If it's an entry point, then you do have to start showing something more, especially as some of these more established brands continue to lock out parts of the cold case.
Definitely, and it seems like the amount of shelf space that's out there for these products is still expanding, right?
It is, although one thing that's very interesting is you look at Whole Foods, which is sort of home base for this movement, aside from the small juice shops that you find in different cities, and they're still cycling through promotion of the weekend.
Sure.
Lots of these companies are being forced by the retailer to do ongoing promotion without any sort of rhyme or reason beyond just igniting the category itself. And it remains to be seen, I think, if any of these smaller companies that are doing it in tandem with someone like a Sujo or a Blueprint are going to benefit from it as much as the bigger companies will. I was going to say the other category that we've been talking about a lot, both internally and with our sources, of course, is cold brewed coffee.
Yeah, I mean, cold brewed coffee is one that's been around for a while, kind of as concentrate product, of course. And I think this seems to be a little bit of a turning point where maybe it'll go into more single serve, ready to drink format. The question I have is, can they maintain sort of the quality and integrity of the product, which was sort of the whole reason for cold brew to exist in the first place, was because it wasn't the Frappuccino. So I think that's something that's still, I feel like this is kind of the turning point where we don't know yet, right?
Yeah, it's interesting to see everyone sort of rushing headlong into single serve after a year or two where we were all looking at the concentrate model.
Right, I mean, it just shows you how quickly some of these categories can evolve, once, a new format or a new strategy is, found. I think categories like that are still so young can pivot pretty quickly, which, point of that is that for, brands that are looking to get into this, I think they just have to remain nimble and able to sort of strike whichever way the category might take them.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about this category too is you see a lot of different plays at varying levels of the value chain. So you see the Califia Farms cold brew with the almond milk, which is really sort of a dairy-based and up till recently a multi-serve carafe, versus something like high brew, which is almost like an energy drink replacement product.
Right, I mean, the range of products in the space is so wide. I mean, looking at those, which are more, like traditional beverages or coffee products, up to, I guess we've got a keg of, Chameleon cold brew. I mean, that's pretty excited for that, but it's a pretty wild or wide sort of swing of like what types of products fit in this category. So that to me says it still needs some sort of figuring out. So what about revisiting some of the categories we've talked about in years past? I think it's interesting to look back and some of these categories that everyone felt like had a lot of legs and have slowed off. One that comes to mind is aloe.
Yeah, well, so this is, I think, something that we talk about a lot, which is the issue of ingredient-based plays and whether or not they translate into good RTD concepts. There's a lot of discussion about aloe as the as the next chia at that point. And we're seeing that repeat itself again with things like maple or cactus waters, small diluted juices attempting to be coconut waters. We always recommend that they just be who they are, but it's hard from a marketing perspective to get consumers to understand your proposition unless you compare it to something else.
Now, what about just some of the bigger categories like CSDs? I mean, that's something that you've written a lot about. What's your take on kind of what's going on there?
Well, the big news, obviously, in this half of the year has been the real astounding drop. I think 7% of revenue drop in both Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi. And we've spent a lot of time talking with different folks about what's driving it. And one of the first things people talk about is aspartame fears. But we dug a little deeper into that, and what we're starting to see is it's much more of a generational issue. People who traditionally have gone to something like a Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi have moved there from Coke or Pepsi. And as that cohort of folks who drink Coke or Pepsi is shrunk, they're not stepping down to diet as much.
Which I guess presents sort of an issue when you look at now generations that just aren't growing up on soda as well. I mean, issue for the CSD category. I suppose for other beverages, it's probably a big opportunity that this 7% of a huge number is disappearing from one category, presumably spreading out to others.
Absolutely, and to be fair, there is still a love affair with bubbles. I was speaking with a beverage executive who was talking about the fact that there's about a half billion dollars worth of diet soda revenue leaving the big companies. You almost see that $500 million being made back up by the growth of sparkling ice and Zevia. The two non-caloric sparkling waters and sodas that have gained so much momentum over the past couple of years.